least NATO didn't, what they were. We thought they were Soviets. For a time, we learned that the Soviets thought they belonged to us.
Right.
But they were very high, very obviously under intelligent control, in formation, and they would come sometimes en masse. The flyover in February of '61 was a couple of hundred of them. They couldn't count them.
Well,
and they thought, oh my God, World War III started here.
Exactly. Didn't the base at that point aim and shoot?
Everybody got on alert. We didn't have the capability to shoot because they were too high and they were too fast. And in those days, we did not have the aircraft nor the weaponry to deal with this. And they were always obviously under intelligent control.
So this is why the study was put into
The study was initiated in '61. I arrived in '63. It was concluded and published in '64. And that, as I said, what's changed my life.
Okay, what was the conclusion? You said they came to some conclusion.
The study was designed initially to determine if there was a threat to Allied forces in Europe. It was a military study, a simple beginning. What the hell is going on? Is there a threat here?
Is there? Was there?
And they concluded after 3 years, apparently not. No threat.
Really?
That's right. Now, the reason they concluded that is, first of all, the technology that they had been exposed to, the technology that had been repeatedly demonstrated to our military, to the Soviets, to everybody, was so far beyond anything we had or even could imagine that the technology was almost out of this world. No pun intended. So, if there had been a threat from these guys, whoever these guys were, it would have been over a long time ago. As one of our old generals used to say, they could have cleaned our clock from the very beginning. Because they demonstrated repeatedly technology that we couldn't even begin to touch.
Okay, this is in the '60s, but didn't Eisenhower have a meeting and make a treaty with these people long before that time?
Let me get back here and tell you that this study was the beginning for me.
Okay.
It opened the doors of my mind, so to speak. I could never leave it. I could never lay it down. I could never walk away from it after that. And I kept, over the years, learning more and studying more. And as I said, it's lucky I didn't end up in jail because I drove my friends up the wall. I pushed my security clearance to the limit. I used to get into classified file cabinets and sort through material and look for photographs and reproduce things that should not have been reproduced. I was a damn nuisance, I'm sure.
So where's the stuff that you...
You see, I knew just this much, but I wanted to know this much.
I understand.
And over the years, I learned this much.
Okay, but what happened to all that stuff that you photocopied or whatever?
Oh my God.
Is that a secret? Is that part of the reason why you haven't been...
The material that I photocopied, I don't have anymore because being somewhat intelligent, I knew that having classified material in my possession that I was not authorized to have meant jail. And as I jokingly said, going to Fort Leavenworth for 30 years. So I destroyed it, but I put it here.
Right.
And I remembered, and I memorized, and I kept notes for years and years. I had a whole series of notes. Well,
okay, to get back to my question, though, Eisenhower had a meeting, theoretically, with aliens. Truman had given a shoot-down order years before you ever read the study.
Eisenhower never gave that order. That was given by an Air Force general. I can't remember the year, but I believe it was in the early '60s. That an Air Force general gave an order to shoot them down. That order was revoked within 90 days because something like 30 aircraft. Because when we started shooting at them, they had a unique way of eliminating all of the electrical systems in our aircraft. They didn't shoot bullets at us. We shot bullets at them and missiles and everything else. But if we attacked them, they had an incredible scientific procedure where they could literally nullify all of the electrical operations in our aircraft. Now, if you're flying a high-performance jet and you're at 30,000 feet going 400, 500 miles an hour, and all of a sudden everything goes dead. And jet pilots used to share that flying one of those 100 series planes was like flying an anvil. They had no glide capability. They were heavy. They were overly armed, and they were heavy aircraft. The only thing keeping them in the sky was a powerful jet engine that kept them going. So if they lost all of their electrical controls, they couldn't even steer, for God's sake. The plane just began going, as I said, it fell like an anvil. Well, we lost a lot of aircraft. A lot of guys got out. They bailed out in time. A lot of planes were lost. We lost a few pilots.
Okay. So
now, that order to shoot them down was revoked within 90 days.
Right.
And they never issued that again because they learned their lesson. Don't mess with these guys.
Okay, but you're telling me that you read a report in which the military states that their technology is not up to par, so that they can't compete with people that are flying over, invading their airspace, et cetera, et cetera. They don't know, I'm assuming they didn't know what their MO was. They didn't know what they were there to do, right?
Let me tell you briefly what the conclusions of this 3-year study was. They concluded that apparently there was not a threat involved, because the repeated demonstrations of technology were so beyond anything we could do or match, that if they were angry at us or they hostile, it'd be over.
Okay, but the logic of that is not, it doesn't fit.
Let me continue.
Just because you can't compete doesn't mean it's not a threat. It still could be a threat.
Let me go on.
Could be an implied threat.
This 3-year study did not find any example of overt hostility on their part.
Okay.
They were not shooting our planes down. We would shoot at them, but they were, poo-poo. It's like throwing little pebbles at somebody, you see? They concluded after the 3-year study that we were dealing not with one group, we were dealing with at least 4 separate groups. Photographs of crashes, retrievals, landings, and contacts, where they had landed and contacted people, indicated that they were humanoid, all of the 4 different groups. Out of the 4 different groups, all humanoid, one group was so human looking that just like us. They could sit next to us in a restaurant, they could sit next to you in a theater, and you would never know. That was the ones that bothered the admirals and the generals the most. That these guys could be walking up and down the corridors of SHAPE headquarters, or the Pentagon, or the White House.
Were they?
I have always suspected that, yes, they have been.
Okay, have you met any?
I've met a couple who I am convinced were from somewhere else, yes.
Okay.
But that's another story, and we'd be here till midnight if I got into that. Let me finish with what I was telling you about the SHAPE study. The assessment concluded we were dealing with incredibly advanced technology. We were dealing with 4 different groups, all humanoid, but one group looked totally human. We concluded in this study that they were from somewhere else. Another planet, another star system, perhaps another galaxy. We concluded that they were not malevolent or hostile, overtly. They certainly were able to defend themselves. But they did not have an agenda, an aggressive agenda that was hostile, because they had not smashed and torn and broken and destroyed our military.
And this is prior to the abduction scenario that has since come to the fore.
Oh yeah, this was an initial study in '64, based on 3 years of research by the military.
Now, who did the study?
The military.
But who in the military? I'm assuming you weren't part of this.
No, I wasn't. I was working in the war room at Shock.
I mean, was it
the study was underway.
Germans? Was it the
study was underway when I arrived. It was made up of NATO members,
Okay.
There were Germans involved, there were French involved, there were Italians involved.
Scientists?
Americans. They went to some universities and got some of the top people. They got historians, Oxford, Cambridge. They got physicists from several of the top universities in Europe. It was a thorough study.
Was it signed by their, in other words, did they sign off on the study? Do you have names?
The individuals who contributed to it, the bits and pieces,
Right.
would put initials to, what their particular part to it. You would have anthropologists, historians, geologists.
Okay, but do you know their names? I don't know if you're going to tell me.
No, I know the names of the guys that I was with at SHAPE headquarters who read the damn thing and signed off on it, yes.
Okay, but what about the ones that
No,
worked on
the individuals, I never kept those names because, as I said, this was classified. If I had ever been caught with a piece of paper from this study, I could have gone to jail.
But someone you were working with gave you this to read.
No, I'll tell you how that happened. One morning, 1 or 2 in the morning, we were on these long shifts. I'm bored to death. The coffee was so black you couldn't drink it. The phones are not ringing. The telegraphs were not going off. It was boring as hell. It happens a lot. The old story is military life is 99% boredom and 1% total disaster, total terror. But we were going through the 99% boredom, And I'm sitting there nodding off and read old newspapers, magazines, and all. The controller on duty at the time was an Air Force bird colonel, what we called an 06. All controllers were 6 level. And I ran their duty roster. He looked at me and he went over to the vault and he pulled this thing out and he said, threw it on my desk and he says, "Hey, this will wake you up. Read this." It was the assessment. And it dealt with UFOs.
Okay.
And it concluded that there were extraterrestrials coming here, had been coming a very long time, sometimes estimates of 1,000 years, 2,000 years. Historical records in the assessment itself indicated that the Romans had been paying attention to them 2,000 years ago. So I'm going through this thing, and history was one of my majors when I was in college. Good God, this is dynamite. The more I read, the more I wanted to read, and I went through the whole damn thing. And then later, every time I was on duty in shock, I would go over to the vault, pull it out, go through it again.
So did you have conversations with your office?
We had limited conversations because you could not discuss classified material outside of shock because there were too many ears.
Sure.
We were having a problem in those days, and let me give you another little side bit here of history. We were in the middle of a vast French spy ring, which, if you really want to do the follow-up on that, you get a book by Leon Uris called Topaz.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
It was made into a movie.
That's right.
Uris laid it out. A French spy ring was going on in Paris. I was there at the time, and we'd find French Air Force officers. We found a French general one time in the woods outside of SHAPE with a bullet hole in his head. Guys were jumping out of apartments in Paris. It was a major scandal. De Gaulle was the president.
Okay, but what was the objective of the spy ring?
The spy ring was Soviet, to find out what we knew that they didn't know. So they had been buying and paying off people all over Europe, Hungarians, French,
so
Germans.
What has that got to do with finding the assessment?
What it got to do is, as a side, is that the UFO issue, no information ever came from Washington or London to SHAPE headquarters on the UFO matter because of the French spy ring. Everything that came from Washington and London to Paris ended up in Moscow. So the NATO headquarters staff, the admiral, there was a British Air Marshal, Thomas Pike, was the deputy secure. He was an assistant deputy to my boss, an American four-star general by the name of Lyman Lemnitz, sir.